Frantz, Fanon, and a psychiatrist and a philosopher, an anti-colonial thinker, wrote in this book, Black Skin, White Mask, to explore the psychological and cultural effects of colonialism and racism on Black people in white-dominant world, in white-dominant society. There were few themes that in this book that he actually put forward, and one of them is the psychological effects of racism. So he examined how colonial dehumanization of Black people, leading them to internalize feelings of inferiority, then many adopt white culture, language, and behavior as a way to gain approval, often at the cost of their own identity. That is the psychological effects of racism. And then he went on to explore the white mask. The white mask is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for assimilation. When Black people feel forced to speak, to act, and live like white people to be accepted or heard. But wearing the mask means denying their authentic self. He also went on to explore language as a power. Frantz Fanon highlights how colonial language is used to exclude and also to control. For example, when people say speak proper English, depending where you are, if you are, because Frantz Fanon was a French educated psychiatrist, uh, forced people to speak proper French or proper English. When those language like that, statement like that, speaking proper English or fluent in English becomes a gateway to social acceptance. But it also reinforces white norms as superior, the language as a power. The fourth thing that is being explored by Frantz Fanon is the desire for recognition. That colonized people don't just want freedom, they want recognition of their humanity. I am because you are Ubuntu. But in racist society, that recognition is often filtered through whiteness. So we also have to mention that critics of this colonial psychiatrist, Fanon is also a trained registered psychiatrist, also critiques how psychology and medicine have been used to pathologize this Black identity and also resistance. Why does this book, Black Skin, White Mask, matter? Why did I pull this book today? It's relevant today, especially in moments when Black voices are only taken seriously when echoed by white authority. So this book, it helps us to ask this question: whose truth matters really? And why it must be repeated by whiteness to be believed? So in Black Skin, There, black skin, white marks, Frantz, Frantz Fanon, Frantz Fanon exposed how colonial people are forced to adopt language, behaviors, and norms of their oppressors just to be heard. But what happens when they refuse? When they refuse to do that? When they chant in their own rhythm, speak in their own tongue, and protest in language white people's ears aren't trained to understand. When people protest in a language that white ears aren't trained to understand, what happened then? What happened when Julius Malema chants "Kill the Boer" at the EFF rally? Many white South Africans hear violence, but what they are really hearing is rage. It's a rage that they can't interpret themselves, that is filtered through fears they haven't resolved. When Julius Malema chants "Kill the Boer" at an EFF rally, many white South Africans hear violence, but what they are really hearing is also rage they can't interpret, filtered through ears, filtered through fears they haven't resolved. But what they're really hearing is rage they can't interpret, filtered through fears they can't resolve. These chants didn't originate in post-apartheid paranoia. They came from a long history of resistance, from Dubula Ipunu to Amanda. They are pre-colonial, performative forms of protest, rhythmic, repetitive, communal, designed to energize, not execute. So to interpret them literally is to misunderstand African oral tradition, where songs carry metaphor, emotion, and political memory, not commands for bloodshed. To interpret them literally is to misunderstand African oral tradition, where songs carry metaphor, emotion, and political memory, not commands for bloodshed. So instead of engaging with the why behind the chant, white elites and black elites as well collapse into victimhood narrative. They hear "Kill the Boer" and shout white genocides, while ignoring the fact that apartheid itself was a system of state-sanctioned killing of black South Africans and land dispossession and economic exclusion. They forget that Boer doesn't mean farmer, or maybe they know that it doesn't mean farmer. It also is symbolic of colonial forces, economic power, and resistance to change. The chant doesn't call for slaughter, it calls for reckoning. Fanon wrote that colonized people or colonized person must wear white masks to be heard. But when black South Africans speak in their own voices, like chanting, raw, loud, unapologetic. White South Africans demand it to be translated into safe, familiar, Eurocentric terms. They want protest without discomfort, truth without indictment. But language isn't the threat, history is. Until white South Africans engage with full weight of apartheid's legacy and the ongoing benefit they inherited from it, chants like "Kill the Boer" will continue to scare them, not because they are dangerous, but because they are honest. Real reconciliation doesn't come when black truth is repeated by white mouth. It comes when black voices are finally heard on their own terms. Johan Rupert recently said that a culture of dependency and lawlessness emerges when a country fails to grow economically, and many South Africans, especially from the elites and business sectors, nodded in agreement. Johan Rupert recently said in that interview at the White House with Donald J. Trump and the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, that the culture of dependency and lawlessness emerges when a country fails to grow economically, and many South Africans, especially from the elite and business sectors, nodded in agreement. On the surface, Rupert's statement seems like common sense. It sounds like common sense when you look at it on the surface, right? But coming from one of South Africa's as wealthiest white men, someone whose fortune was built during apartheid and expanded under neoliberalism, it lands very differently. President Ramaphosa spoke about inequality, crime, spoke about crime. He also spoke about economic stagnation during meeting with Donald Trump and was barely acknowledged. If you look at the video clip, barely acknowledged. But when Rupert echoed similar sentiments using polished business language, the room suddenly listened. Why? Because when black leaders speak of structural violence, it's politics, all right? But when white billionaires speak of disorder, it's the truth. It's truth. So let's challenge the phrase culture of dependency. Was it systemic exclusion that forced millions of black South Africans into joblessness, landlessness, and undereducation, aka Bantu education? The country doesn't become lawless in a vacuum. It becomes unstable when the beneficiaries of past injustices retain wealth and power, while the majority remain locked out of growth. When Julius Malema chants about revolution or says land must return, he's seen as dangerous, even though he's describing the same stagnation Rupert is describing, isn't it? The only difference here is he's not wearing the white mask. Julius is not wearing white mask. That's the difference. Johan Rupert may be right about economic failure breeds instability, but let's not pretend that instability is disconnected from who has the capital. So instability is not disconnected from who has the capital, who sets the rules, and who's allowed to speak without being feared. If we only listen when message comes from whiteness, we are not solving the problem, we are protecting it. Johan Rupert also said that it is a culture of dependency and lawlessness that develop when countries fail to grow. And many of them in that room agreed. But we have to ask this important question. When did that failure begin? Who benefited from the original structure? Who still profit from it? It's actually easy for Johan Rupert to blame dysfunction on culture when you ignore the historic violence that created it. So it's so much easier to blame the dysfunction of culture while ignoring the historic violence that created that dysfunction. Was it dependency or was it economic exclusion that kept millions of black South Africans locked out of land, of capital, and opportunity? When Julius Malema chants, "Kill the Boer," it triggers fear, but not understanding. You have to understand that. And I've explained to the meaning of "kill the Boer." It's not literal. It is meant to end apartheid system. It was used as a chant during the apartheid era. It's a political chanting communication. It's a form of protest that was used back then. And it's also viewed now as still that way. No reasonable person can view that chant as meaning as literal, because chanting in African culture, in South African black indigenous culture, chanting is gibberish. Alright, it's not literal. Alright, so that was used, that label that was used, that chant, as a protest, not violence. It's not a literal. So people, when Julius Malema chants "Kill the Boer," it triggers fear for them, not understanding. The chant is part of South Africa's liberation history, rooted in protest, not violence. But chanting, the act of chanting, is also part of indigenous South African culture of chanting. There's so many chants people do in the cultural ceremony. So not just in political sphere, but also in cultural ceremony. So that's what chant, the act of chanting, going up and down, jumping up and down. Anything you sing or utter through that process, it's not literal. All right? And also you have to understand this. Boer doesn't mean white person in this "Kill the Boer." It's not mean white person. It represents a system of land theft, police brutality, and the apartheid enforcement. So obviously for English it's apartheid, for us South Africans apartheid enforcement. That's how we pronounce apartheid. We don't say apartheid, we say apartheid enforcement. Alright, the chant doesn't mean kill a person, your neighbor. It means end oppression. And 2023 South African Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court of the land, ruled that the chant is not hate speech. It had been to Constitutional Court many times. This one, it's been settled.